Okay, welcome back, everybody. Thanks again for being a part of the Transitioning to Learning and Development virtual conference hosted by the Training, Learning, and Development community. Thanks so much for joining us. Let me take a look here. I'm seeing, Kara just posted in chat, and I want to make sure that we have folks rolling in. Yep. People are slowly coming into the room. All right, excellent. Hope you guys are enjoying the event. The schedule is something I'm really curious about. So if any of you have any time afterwards and want to give me some feedback on the schedule, just sort of let me know. Me doing a week-long thing with a bunch of sessions, sort of like spaced the way that they are, is really different. For me personally, I thought I wanted to try this to see if I could like get work done in between sessions and actually even try to make it feel more like a conference in some ways. And I feel like it sort of has. I like the fact that in between sessions, there's time for the virtual tables and I can and have been getting work done in between. It's been pretty helpful. So yeah, let me know if you have any feedback on this schedule. Final session of the day, and we have the incredible Devin Torres here to share with us about Imposter Syndrome. Meghan Markle brought Devin here. Let me tell you a little bit about Devin. Devin's an instructional designer at 280 Group, the owner of Torres Content Creation. Devin's an educator, and although new to the official title of instructional designer, Devin has been developing curriculum and assessment for K through 12 and higher education for 9 years. Devin is passionate about equitable and relatable e-learning and distance education. And, she has participated in supporting TLDC with some of our events whose subject matter cover those types of things. And Devin likes leveraging data and educational technology to deliver experiences that best fit learner need. In 2021, she launched Torres Content Creation in order to develop and grow in the e-content space, adapt to a changing work world, and leave something for her daughter for the future. All right, Devin, I'm going to go ahead and hide myself and let you take it away.
Thank you so much, Luis. That was amazing. And thank you, everybody who is tuning in. I'm on the East Coast. It's 5 p.m. here. So if you're tuning in late, super thank you. And I wanted to talk about imposter syndrome. I'm not going to tell you a ton about myself because I think that plays out in the story that I'm going to tell. But I'm going to share my screen and we can jump right into it. Okay, so can I get a thumbs up that people are seeing my screen? Okay, perfect. So I want to talk about imposter syndrome and how Meghan Markle brought me here. If this is why you're tuned in, I love her, so I will do my best to do her the justice that she deserves, right? So we're going to cover some topics about imposter syndrome. We're going to talk about what it is, or where does it show up. We're going to talk about if it really is imposter syndrome, because there are things that impact us as people that may not mean it's imposter syndrome. Systemic barriers, for example. We'll get into that. I'm going to tell a story about my own experience with imposter syndrome and how Meghan Markle is helping me overcome mine. And then we're going to talk about how we move forward. So, what is imposter syndrome? By definition, we can see it here. It's the persistent inability to believe that one's success is deserved or has been legitimately achieved as a result of one's own efforts or skills. What does that mean? In transitioning, or anytime you do something new, you'll get those, hey, first day jitters, new experience, kind of freaking out. Imposter syndrome is a constant feeling of you don't deserve it. You don't deserve to be here. You don't measure up. It's not for you. Even though you've done it, you got the job, you did the thing, you still feel like it's not for you. And it can feel like a couple of different things. It can feel like self-doubt. It can present as anxiety, unease, and a general feeling of incompetence. And we're going to talk about that. We're going to pull in the next slide and kind of see how that's impacting some of the people on this chat. And there's a science behind it. So there's 5 types. I'm going to go over those briefly. There is perfectionism. So You've heard of perfectionism. Oftentimes people will describe perfectionists as control freaks. They set excessively high goals for themselves, and when they fail to reach that goal, they experience this major self-doubt. We also have the superhuman complex. I will say superhuman, you'll see it as superwoman, superman. But when people experience this phenomenon, they're convinced that they shouldn't be there. They're a fraud. And so they tend to take on more work to kind of measure up. And what happens when we take on way too much work? It can lead us to fail. And it can lead us to stress and have, mental health impacts and physical impacts. And those impacts not only impact our work, it impacts the relationships with those around us. We have the natural genius, gifted child syndrome. Anybody seen the memes? Anybody heard of that? So, you're young, you do something, you pick it up really quickly. I see some laughter. You pick it up really quickly, and then you try something new, and that thing doesn't come as quick, and you automatically feel like you failed because it didn't come as naturally to you. We have the soloist, very guilty of this one myself. I hate asking for help. Sometimes a soloist presents as someone who feels if they ask for help, it shows a weakness, shows a flaw. So that's pretty common. And then we have the expert. And the expert is kind of an interesting one to me. They measure their competence on what and how much they know, but they'll never know enough because you can never know everything, right? We've heard in a couple sessions this week, we're lifelong learners. That's kind of how you fall into learning and development, and that's how you fall into teaching, right? So you're never going to know everything, but when you don't know everything, when you can't shoot out that answer, it gives you that fear of self-doubt. You start feeling bad, and that contributes to it. So those are the 5 types of imposter syndrome. And so where do those things show up? They can show up professionally in your work. And, we're talking about transitioning into learning and development. So show of thumbs up, how many people have felt imposter syndrome professionally as they've tried to make this transition or when they made this transition? I'm seeing a lot. Okay. It can also present personally. People have a lot of identities, right? So you hang out with certain friends and maybe you don't choose to show parts of yourself. And you get in with these friends and you kind of feel like an imposter in certain settings. I feel like that when my friends, like, they used, to like to go out or whatever. I'm fairly introverted. And so anytime I would go out, I'm like, I don't belong here. This is not for me, right? And just other spaces. I wanted to actually poll some people. I'm going to post the poll now. It should be shown, okay, on stage. So go ahead and vote. Where does imposter syndrome show up most for you? All right. Votes are coming in. A lot of professionallys. All professionally. Okay. Cool. All right. Some personally coming in. All right. So in this group, it seems majority are showing professionally, and there's some personally floating in now. So I'm going to go ahead and close this poll. I just wanted to show and talk about it does come up in multiple places. Also, I said other. So in the chat, what do we have? Okay, solo's definition. Kara, I'm super introverted in real life. Same. Definitely can relate. Actually, that's how I met Kara. I pulled up at a virtual table, and we started talking, and I was like, this is painful for me, and you seem nice. And she was extremely nice, so thank you for that. So good feedback. Let's see what else we have. Let me go ahead and close this poll out. All right. So those are places it shows up. It shows up everywhere. And the thing to remember about imposter syndrome is everybody feels it, right? I don't care if you're an expert or not. Everybody feels at some point imposter syndrome. It's really handling what happens when it doesn't start to go away. So we're talking about transitioning into learning and development. And I know there's a lot of teachers that are joining us, and we've heard a lot of If you don't feel imposter syndrome, you are probably an egomaniac. I like it. But we have a lot of teachers joining us. We've heard a lot of good panels about breaking into L&D, about breaking into ID specifically. And I've been interested on LinkedIn to see how this transition is going for people who are teachers and coming in. So this is making its rounds on LinkedIn. My friend Holly shared it. I've seen it a couple times. Prompted a lot of interesting conversation. So I'm going to read it, and then I'm going to open a poll again. So this is a job listing, and it says there's all the text for the jobs. There's, what you're supposed to have. And then it says, please do not apply if you have never formally practiced instructional design as your profession. And then there is a second level that says you are a K-12 teacher without any formal instructional design training and experience. And then please send work samples in your response. So in the chat, can you type how this particular listing makes you feel? Okay, so an old job with similar language, poor form. Confused, not worthy. Getting kicked in the gut, good one. A bit angry. Discouraged. Not a place I want to work, suggesting that teachers have no value, like a loser, and letting you know not to work there. Everyone thinks teachers are great. I've been lied to. Okay. Someone more experienced than me, and thanks for letting me know. Not valuable. And obviously they don't understand what teachers do. Lisa, like what happened to them in school. So there's no right or wrong here. But those were the kind of feelings that I was seeing on LinkedIn. It makes people feel uncomfortable. It kind of is a gut punch when you're a teacher and you see that, right? Why is it a separate line? And so I'll walk you through my initial reactions of seeing this, because I can see it both ways, right? I read it and I see this red highlighted K-12 teacher without any formal instructional design training and experience. And I'm like, ugh, like I was in K-12 and why are you calling me out? But then I see that it says without any formal instructional designs experience. Well, I do have formal instructional design training and experience because I moved into higher ed and I got that experience. But after reading that, and after seeing that they had called out K-12, and this is just for me personally, I don't want to send my work samples anymore because it didn't make me feel good. Now, that's just me. And as someone who has worked in hiring and sat on panels, I've had people apply for jobs, not reading them thoroughly or not understanding the posting. And they come in and it's not working. And so maybe this company has an influx of K-12 teachers and it's not a fit and they felt the need to do it. But exactly what Kayleen says, the don't apply if you don't have any formal ID training and experience. Calling out K-12 was unnecessary. I agree. And again, this is just me personally. I've seen a lot of conversation around this. Like, this is fine. They're weeding out candidates. They've gotten an influx. But the thing of it is, yes, they're weeding out candidates. This also sets a precedent, though, because it did feel bad. I haven't been in K-12 since 2017, and it still felt bad to see, even though I am former K-12. I'm not a K-12 teacher now, but I was, without any formal instructional design training and experience. I have it, but I don't want to send you my work anymore because it doesn't feel good. And this leads to imposter syndrome, because when you read this, as everybody says, it's discouraging. Exactly. There are ways to reframe this conversation. And again, I wanted to share this because I saw it. There was a lot of good conversation about it. And I was like, this fits in perfectly here. So now I'm going to open up another poll. And I'm going to ask, without having the conversation I just had, let's see, would you still apply? So vote yes or no. And again, I don't even know what company this was for, to be honest. I just wanted to use this as an exercise. Okay, getting some yeses, getting a lot more nos. All right, starting to creep up. All right, we have about 16% saying yes, 85% saying no. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close that poll. But that was just kind of an exercise and to show people that there is a narrative, or not a narrative. There's when you're a teacher and you're kind of moving into this space, you'll see a lot of this discouraging stuff. I hate to say it, but I've seen it. And it kind of makes you doubt your skills, right? And that is something that feeds into imposter syndrome. And that's what we're going to talk more of next. Let's see. So, does anyone remember that commercial? And it was like, maybe is she born with it? Maybe it's Maybelline. So when I was making the slide, I kept saying, maybe it's imposter syndrome, or maybe it's a systemic barrier. I like to talk about this because I think sometimes when we see somebody is struggling, or we hear somebody is struggling, we say, oh, it's imposter syndrome and you'll get over it. Sometimes you can't get over it because sometimes it's not imposter syndrome. And there are a couple of things, right? Is it systemic? So if you are following me on LinkedIn, I shared this exact quote, which says, calling it imposter syndrome hides the fact that oppressive systems teach many of us to actively suppress and hate ourselves. It's not imposter syndrome, it's the consequence of oppression. And that quote's by Blair Imani. And I have a couple identities, right? I'm very proud of. I'm a biracial Black woman. And in my career, I have worked at a PWI in predominantly white places. And I grew up in a small, predominantly white town. And sometimes when I'm applying for jobs, or I was working in certain jobs, especially in meetings, right? I felt the need to be quieter. And it's kind of an embarrassing statement, and it's a hard statement to admit, but I felt the need to be quieter because I was a biracial Black woman at a PWI in a meeting of a sea of white men. And that's uncomfortable. For Black women are often told to tone down. If you challenge, you're the angry Black woman. I didn't want to be the angry Black woman at work. I never want to be the angry Black woman. It feels bad. It makes you feel bad to think that people think of you that way. But those barriers do exist, and those cultural nuances do exist, and we have to be cognizant of that, because sometimes in a situation, it's not imposter syndrome, it's a systemic barrier, and maybe that's not for you. I like to think that in education, in learning and development, we're working to change some of that, but it's real. And it's real in the transition process. And so we have to be aware. Additionally, systemic barriers are really easy to disguise as equal, but they are never easy to disguise as equitable. When I worked in K-12, it was a lot of, hey, the lunch calendar's on the internet where everybody can see it, so it's equal. But it wasn't equitable because not everybody had that access. So yeah, it's available technically to everybody, but was it accessible? No. The same thing happens in hiring. Especially, we're learning. We are learning in this culture. So I just want to remind people before it's imposter syndrome. No, sometimes it is a systemic problem. Feeding right into that, is it poor company culture? So it's really hard to feel like you belong somewhere or excelling when the culture of the company doesn't support you or make you feel that way. So how does poor company culture feed into imposter syndrome? By criticizing when problems and failures occur, by tactily endorsing behaviors like routinely working late, or when sufferers often feel like they have to work harder than others just to prove their worth, by never encouraging employees to recognize the achievements of others or themselves. So, thumbs up. How many people have been in a poor company culture in their career? Okay. And how many times did you take a step back and think, is it poor company culture? It's not poor company culture, it's me. How many times did you blame yourself? I want to see thumbs up for that too. Yeah. It's hard to thrive in plants don't grow in a dry environment, right? It's hard to thrive in an environment where you're not supported. or the culture is not supportive, or the culture is not to empower and celebrate the small ones. If you're already feeling like you don't belong there and the culture doesn't support it, you'll never feel that way, right? Unless you change it. And the third thing is sometimes it's not imposter syndrome, it's just the wrong thing. So before I left K-12, I had taken a job at a mental health organization, a nonprofit, as a caseworker because I was determined to be a social worker. That is not for me. I knew it was. I 100% knew it was. Like, I went to college for it. I studied for it. I was going to do it. Maxine Gray did it on Judging Amy, so I was going to do it. It was not for me. I failed. It was not like I was terrible at that job. And it was really hard for me to accept that. And, Kimberly Scott gave a great presentation on other areas outside of ID. It's more than just ID. And don't box yourself in as you're making this transition, because sometimes things aren't for you. You'll go into the interview and you'll know that. So just keep those things in mind. Sometimes it's not imposter syndrome. Sometimes it's just not for you. No matter what they say or what all the core values of an organization, the culture is always the behavior that is tolerated. Yep. And my first job out of college had such a toxic culture and I felt so incompetent. I was terrified that the rest of my career was going to be like that. And it took a long time to get out of that mindset. 100%. And as we move into this next topic, that's what I'm going to talk about. And I want to address one more comment. As a businesswoman, we're often discriminated against when it comes to DEI issues. I once told an executive networking group of all white men, all of you are leaving me and all the women on your team out of the discussion, and that's not cool. Stop it. Good for you. I love that. We need more of that, right? But I want to talk a little bit about toxic culture and just my journey with imposter syndrome. So I started in K-12. I was an ABA before I knew a lot about what that practice was. Did it for a little bit, wasn't for me. I was a teacher in an after-school park prep assessment program. I loved it. I loved getting the kids out for the exercise portion and, kind of working through some things and then going back to the curriculum. But I did it for a while. And and again, then I was ready to go. So not UMGC, not University of Maryland. I wish I wanted to go there, but I went to school online, and there's a reason. So then I went and I finished my bachelor's at the University of Maryland Global Campus, and my bachelor's was in social sciences, and then I moved into a master's program there in distance ed and e-learning. What better way to take a master's program about that than online, right? So in this time, between University of Maryland and higher ed and K-12, it was all kind of blending together up here. And I left K-12 and I said I need a different job. I want to work with data. I really like data and how it impacts behavior, how it can influence behavioral change. So I took a job as an institutional research analyst at a higher ed institution, and that job was tied to an underrepresented student program. And they had a bridge program. So underrepresented for us was minority, first gen, rural area, low income area. And we had a bridge program where we brought students on campus for 2 weeks right before the start of the semester, and we gave them this like mini section of courses, and we helped them find community and build a cohort. Amazing program called the D'Souza Brent Scholars Program. My boss's name's FJ Talley. He's amazing. If he's on here, hey. And he took a chance on me, and he let me teach courses in this bridge program. So I started out with public speaking, which is funny because public speaking terrifies me. I have imposter syndrome right now. And I taught it. And then we moved into kind of shifting these courses towards more of a social emotional learning. And we moved into a course on imposter syndrome. And I taught that with my coworker, JP. She's awesome. And it was impactful. I was sitting in sessions and students were really opening up. They were acknowledging some imposter syndrome. They were working through it with other students around them. They were really building community. I did this for 3 years. So I had experience. And then that program was grant funded. So didn't know if the grant was going to be secure. That That was scary. And I transitioned into an academic support and technology specialist role in an ed studies department. So, still working in education, supporting students through field placements and assessment and things like that. And this was my first time in an all faculty department. It was all faculty and 2 staff. We had tenured and non tenured faculty in the department. And this is where I started to kind of feel some of that imposter syndrome. I wasn't just doing data analysis and institutional research, which I found myself really good at. I was being challenged to plan student schedules. I was being challenged to advise. It was terrifying to me. And I was terrified I was going to mess up. And because I am a perfectionist, when I did mess up, it started to impact my work. I would get stressed, I would miss things, and that starts to impact students. So that feels terrible. Additionally, I'm in an all faculty department. I'm surrounded by a lot of PhD holders, which is great. I am not a PhD holder. And sometimes comments were made and that made me kind of feel like my expertise in certain things, including distance education, which I do have a degree in, didn't matter. Sometimes it was age comments. I am about to be 32, and so I was younger side in this department, and it felt like because I didn't have the level of experience or the number of years of experience that my ideas or the work that I was doing didn't matter. And that felt bad. And so wrote it out for about 3 years. COVID happened. I got pregnant. Perfect timing, right? Um, so while I was pregnant, I had thought about it. I said I wanted to be a better person for my daughter, right? I wanted to be a stronger person. I wanted to come home and be really excited about what I did. So I made a switch to an externship coordinator position for career development at the same institution. In that position, gave me a lot of skills that I needed for instructional design. I was hiring faculty, but I was also developing curriculum and training those faculty. And our faculty were experts in the field, but not necessarily teachers, right? So it was kind of a good mix of developing training for people who had to learn how to train. It was super fun. I really enjoyed that job. I really enjoyed that team. But then they told us we were coming back in person, and I also decided that that wasn't for me anymore either. And I wanted to stay remote. So I started an LLC that I really don't do much with, and it wasn't going to make enough money to support me. So I was like, okay, it's time to start looking for another job. But it was really hard to start that job search after being somewhere for 5 years and prior to that being somewhere for 5 years because I didn't feel like I belonged anywhere else. So I could go work at a community college in the local area because I wasn't moving. I could try to find a remote kind of advising or support tech job. I even had written to UMGC and was like, hey, do you have any adjunct positions open in the distance and e-learning department? I'd love to help. And they didn't, unfortunately. So I was really scared to make that leap because I didn't feel like I belonged anywhere else. Yeah, Lori. So getting back in the job search after 12 years, the gap is tough. It was really tough. And luckily, because I had my daughter, I also got a therapist because I knew that postpartum I was going to be feeling a little different, and I wanted to talk that out with somebody. And my therapist is amazing. I love her. And she was actually one of the people that encouraged me to make this leap because she's like, "You're obviously unhappy. You know what you're doing. Make a portfolio." So I did, and I started asking people. Holly Owens was one of those people. I looked at work from people. I sat in on sessions. I looked to YouTube. I didn't do I didn't do a program for instructional design. I had some instructional design programming in my degree, and I worked in an ed studies department, in an MAT department that taught instructional design, so I could go to those faculty and have conversations around it. And I started building, and I started learning, and then it was time to interview, and I interviewed for a couple places, and I ended up at 280 Group, who really stood out to me because as I was interviewing, I kept saying, so they optimize product management. That's the thing. I don't know anything about product management. At least that's what I kept saying when I interviewed. I wanted to be very transparent that I don't know product management. And one of the people hiring me at the time, he laughed. He said, "You'll get it. It's fine. Do you know instructional design?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I think I know that." So I got the job. Super excited. I make the jump, and one of the things I realized looking back is I was always holding on to this statement of I don't know product management. So our company is remote and we do this cool thing where we have donuts. So like we get on Slack, right? And we get to one-on-one with people. And I would always open with, "Hey, yeah, I don't know anything about product management." And that imposter syndrome that I was trying to be so vulnerable and open about really served as a shield for a little while because as an introvert, when I said, "Oh, I don't know this," no one made me talk, right? And that's good for me in my mind. But it was imposter syndrome. I wanted to make sure people did not know what I was doing so that when I inevitably failed, I had a reason because I didn't know what I was doing, not because I was new, which makes total sense to not know what you're doing. Um, not because I was at a new company and learning new people, but because I just didn't want to fail. And on top of that, I didn't want to ask, right? So as we're doing these donuts, I'm meeting all of these great people and all of our client services team have all these great years of experience. They've worked for these amazing companies. They're so knowledgeable. Everyone loves Star Wars. I'm in heaven. I'm like, this is great, right? But I'm nervous when I hear their experience. And when I hear it, I'm like, well, why would they care what I have to say? And then my direct coworker, we're a new ID team, and she had been doing instructional design, like the actual instructional design, longer than I had within her own company. And I'm like, I can't keep up with her. Like, what am I gonna do? And I was nervous. I was nervous to work with this person. And it impacted relationships because I was watching her like make these leaps and share these ideas, and I couldn't bring myself to do it. I just couldn't. I was like, they're not gonna care what I have to say. I'm not experienced enough. I'm new. I'm just gonna sit back here and I'm gonna wait for direction and I'm gonna do it for a year. And then after a year, I'll know it. And then I will start to try to make change. Then I'll start to get in there and do something cool. But that imposter syndrome it's holding me back. That sometimes if you can do it, imposter syndrome will just hold you back from doing it. It'll feel safe and it'll feel good because you can fall back into the I'm new and I don't have to try this and I don't have to do it. But then you're not experiencing anything. You're not learning. You're not doing that continuous learning that we always talk about. And you're not challenging yourself. So, luckily, I am at a place with a great company culture. Um, and it all kind of happened at once. So, I had gotten hooked up with the TLDC when I started instructional design. Christine Belzy, I had found her on LinkedIn and she had put me here, and I had met such amazing people. And we were talking about this conference and we were throwing out ideas. And I said imposter syndrome because I know this is something that everyone struggles with. And I remember my own transitions. And I was like, this will be a good topic. And I said it hoping that somebody else would take it. Anybody. I'm like, Kayleen's going to take it. Bella's going to take it. Somebody's going to take it, right? But nobody took it. And it was it's like a week before we were supposed to put this on. And I'm like, this is such an important topic. But, if no one wants to take it, whatever, we'll skip it. So here's where Meghan Markle comes in, right? I love Meghan Markle for 1,000 reasons, right? Biracial Black woman, loves her mom, super cool mom. Dad's side's a little off, can relate, right? Um, she married my childhood crush. A million reasons I love her. Um, but the thing I love most about her is when I watch her interviews and I watched the Oprah interview, I have the wedding cut. We got married the same year. We had a baby at the same time. Like, we're meant to be friends. I hope she sees this one day. But the reason I like her so much is because she's vulnerable and she's honest when she has these conversations. I feel like, you see a lot of stuff in the press. You see a lot of hate, for women who speak out about being vulnerable, who speak out about not feeling that they're meant for something. And she does it. And I'm like, I can relate to that. And then I listen to how she grows and how she just continues on. And I'm like, I want to do that. So I see she's coming out with this this podcast. I hear her first guest is Serena Williams. I'm immediately invested because one of the things I like to do as someone who doesn't like to kind of like push is I like to listen to women who have that in them, who have that push and that drive, because I want to be that. I aspire to be that. So I like to listen. And I'm listening to the first episode. It was a Wednesday. Wednesdays are my like days for myself, right? And I'm driving and I'm listening, and she starts showing snippets of what her podcast is going to be like and who's going to be on it. And I hear a Mindy Kaling quote, and she essentially says, sometimes when I hear about imposter syndrome, I want to say, I know the answer is yes, but my answer is no. Because if I still think that I am not capable of doing this after so many years, then I must be like clinically unable to like see my success. This is a clinical thing at this point. And I heard it and it snapped. And I'm like, I'm going to go home and I'm going to tell Luis that I can talk about imposter syndrome because I proposed it. And for weeks, I told myself, I'm not the person to do that. I'm new to instructional design. I'm new to L&D. This isn't for me. But I taught this. I taught this idea and this concept to students for years. So why not me? Why does it have to be somebody else? Why couldn't it be me? So that's what I mean by Meghan Markle brought me here. Her podcast brought me here. Mindy Kaling brought me here. But, you know, I'm here because I had to take a step back and think, why can't it be me talking to people, right? And I'm super thankful that you are here listening to it. So that's the Meghan Markle story. So I hope I did her justice. But the other thing, the last thing I want to talk about is, so what do we do, right? Like what do we do with imposter syndrome? And these are the 4 things that work for me, but I'm going to ask at the end, what are the things that work for you? And I want to talk about it. My first one, sit with it. No one likes feeling uncomfortable, but we have to because it challenges us and it makes us change and it makes us think. So you know that the feelings that you have are valid and it's okay to have them. And eventually they'll start to shift. And you know, you got to think about all the things that you like, you didn't know how to teach, right? You didn't wake up one day and like, I'm a teacher. You learned how to do that. The first time I got in front of a classroom, especially in college, I was like, I was the worst instructor. I didn't think that at the time because I was really motivated. But I look back and I'm like, I could have done some things differently. I could have not ate breakfast during that presentation that I was giving. That was super professional, Devin, right? So we learn. The first time at this company, I worked with an SME. I was challenged. And I love that about our SMEs. They challenge us. Our SMEs are internal and they challenge us. And when I was dealing with such imposter syndrome around this role, it felt like an attack. That challenge felt like an attack. But what they were doing was prompting me to make sure that we had the right why for the course I was delivering. The same way in K-12, when I had a student that challenged me, it wasn't necessarily because my lessons sucked, because my content sucked. That student needed a way to learn. I had to adapt so that student could understand the concept. And I'm okay with that. Some people aren't okay with that, but I am. Same thing for ID. I'm okay with being challenged because if it leads me to deliver a better product, then it's about the learner. It's not about my ego or SME ego or anybody's ego. It's about the learner, right? So sit with it. Build community. These events, the things that you're doing right now, they're important. I think it's important to have a good mix of people in your circle because we talked about poor company culture. That burnout contributes to that. But when you're around people who are feeling down or feeling negative, aren't trying to push forward, don't want to see the way forward, are settled, you can't move forward either, right? So I think it's good to, one, meet people who are at your level, talk to new people making the transition. I'm a newbie. I've only been doing this for a year on September 17th. I'm new to this. And I like talking to other people who are new to this because I've learned so much and it's so nice to feel heard and feel like I can relate to people. And I've learned so much from this conference. And that's the next thing. Meet people who can challenge you too. Meet people who are up here in their career. I learned so much from the people I have met in this group. Gwen runs this excellent peer mentoring circle, and I've learned so much and even today I'm listening to like some of these conversations about like what you should do as an ID, and I'm like, I'm going to take that to work on Monday and it's going to be great. Right. And for me, it was also building community within my company. I can tell you that the day of that Meghan Markle podcast, it might have been me like feeling empowered, but the SME, one of the SMEs that I'm working with, said to me, you know, what you're working on now is it's really showcasing what you bring to the company. That made me feel so good. Like I was like, okay, I belong here. And this is an SME. Like I value their opinions so much because they come with so much knowledge. And I was like, that little thing just made my day. And then I could go into a meeting and I could challenge an idea. And I did because I felt empowered to do so because of community. Right. This next one I love. I started doing this when I was in K-12 and have just kept up with it. It's the I'm great folder. Doesn't have to be a folder. Um, Keep some things that make you feel proud of your accomplishments. I gave a talk at UMGC about connectivism and building online learning culture. And the host had emailed me and said it was a great presentation. We should work together again. I printed that email when I worked in higher ed and I hung it on my door because it was motivating. um, it was motivating to see that somebody cared about what I was talking about. Somebody cared about remote learner populations and building community, and I could continue to do that work. Cards from kids are my favorite. When I had in-home, I did in-home ABA for a little bit. And once I shifted, I was kind of just doing in-home work in general with students. And I got cards for my birthday, and I got, you're the world's greatest ABA therapist. Um, so I kept all of those things. I keep these accomplishments. I keep recordings I do. I keep letters that I get written. I keep good student letters because I like to look at them and say, okay, even if I'm not feeling great now, if I feel like I'm an imposter now, wasn't an imposter there, and I can get back there. And then the last thing I want to talk about is remember that not only are you multifaceted, so are other people. So we talk about how comparison is a stealer of joy. You may see people who it looks like made this really easy switch, right? Into L&D, into ID. It was like they woke up one day, they made a decision, and they jumped. I'm as guilty as everybody else is of like only posting good stuff on social media because, no one wants to see my kid screaming because she stole my goldfish and I was mad about it. Like no one wants to see that. They want to see the cute pictures, right? They want to see they want to see my my college graduation certificate, not that I was up crying at 2 a.m. because I was working on my thesis, right? But you never know the other things that people have going on. And again, we talk about systemic barriers, we talk about poor company culture. People don't often openly talk about those things because they're hard and they present an issue, right? Like you can get fired for talking about poor company culture, unfortunately. I live in an at-will state. So I followed the processes the best I could when we had poor company culture. And then I just, I made the decision to leave. And the other thing is someone's always looking at you as an expert in something. And I like to tell this story. I told my former student I was talking about it tonight, but when I was an advisor, and in that academic tech role, I had to manage student workers. And if you've ever talked to me in real life, you know that managing people also gives me anxiety because I do that thing where, like I said, I don't know anything about product management. I cannot manage people. I can't. And I say that, right? But I had a student worker and we had an incident. In the position I worked in, I worked a lot with data, confidential data, and so did my student worker. And something got shared. Something accidentally was said in a public setting. And I was like, oh, you can't do that. So we had to have a conversation about it. And I felt bad, right? I was like, ugh, I don't think I handled that well. I think she's going to feel really bad about being called out, but I had to do it. And I like debated about it like all night. I'm like, she's going to be so mad. We went to lunch the next day and she said to me, I'm really glad you called me out. And I was like, oh, really? Because I hate being called out. And she said, you are the type of professional I want to be. And that meant something because I didn't feel like a good professional then. I felt terrible, right? But it meant something to her. And it's so funny because now she is in a very similar position in student support to what I was in. And she has to be that person. And I know she's probably great at it. Like she's always been great at it. But that felt really, really good, right? So just remember that you are an expert in something. And you can eventually be an expert in this. And we've heard a lot of conversation this week too. Like there's a lot of we talk about influencers and we talk about these really expensive academies and, you know, people kind of playing up on the surge of moving into L&D. And sometimes what presents, you know, as an expert and they know everything, they probably struggle too. They probably have had some negative feedback. They had to learn things. So don't necessarily look at everybody and just be like, they had it all together, they have it all together, I'll never be there. You don't always know what it took to get them there. So yeah. I want to look through some of these comments, and then I also want to ask you all, you know, what are the things that you do when you're feeling imposter syndrome, or as you felt imposter syndrome through this process? Like, what have you been doing? Who have you been talking to? I want to discuss it, and I will move this slide. This is how you can reach me if you want. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Twitter. Karen North got me back on Twitter. I'm not on it much, but I am on it sometimes. And I'm on Instagram. So I want to look through some of these comments, though, and I do want to hear about the imposter syndrome. Oh, I love it. My good job reminders are saved in my notes folder on my phone. I recently moved from hometown to Phoenix and found a birthday card from my great grandma. Oh, I love that. I've kept a card from 1997 from a third grader asking me to be his girlfriend after I volunteered in his classroom. Those are always fun. Whole IKEA box, letters and cards from students and colleagues. Why I teach, why I didn't keep me in the profession. It's nice to go back through. Absolutely. The one thing I do want to say, I struggled with this. When I moved from higher ed to corporate, right? I was like, I'm losing a piece of me that's an educator. That's a lie. It's a lie I was telling myself. I'm still an educator. And I want people to remember that too. If you're making the shift, you're not giving up a piece of yourself. You're evolving and taking skills that you've used and you're just using them differently. It doesn't mean you're not an educator. It doesn't take away from that. So I want to remind people, because that is something I definitely struggled with. I think of Dory's mantra in Finding Nemo, just keep swimming. Vulnerability is a necessary part of leadership. It is one of the characteristics that defines the difference between a manager and a leader. Yes. Good, Rick. There are people in my life who can give me great and level advice, but I also have my cheerleaders. Sometimes it helps just to hear from those people. 100%. Studying. How did you work through your public speaking fear? Hi, Nicole. Good question. It's funny. So Nicole works with me, and it's really interesting. I refuse to speak at company meetings a lot because I get really nervous. And because I am new to that company, it's very hard for me to say things, even things I work with these people every day, and it makes me nervous. I don't think I'm through it yet necessarily, but I'm getting better because I know I have to be. And I think I just think about, if I can say something that can impact somebody positively and help them grow, then why not do it? After I had my daughter, I started challenging myself. I 100% attest that to her. So slowly working through it. Kira says, I have a sign I made a hung behind my monitor on the wall that says, don't tolerate negative self-talk about yourself when you wouldn't tolerate that language from others. And it helps me deal with struggle bus days. Absolutely. I can be pretty pessimistic. If you listened to the Crowdcast episode I did with Luis, my mom watches all this stuff, which makes me happy, but then she'll call me and be like, why do you say you were terrible at this? Why did you say you sucked at that? I'm like, because I did. And like, to me, it's just honest, but like, I didn't necessarily suck. I'm just habit, right? Kayleen, absolutely. When you're feeling imposter syndrome creep in, definitely call up your cheerleaders and let them boost you back up. One of my colleagues gives me a compliment, I also ask if they'll add it to my LinkedIn profile. Good. That's good. If they don't want to write something, then I'll ask them to click on the skills they know I have. On bad days, I'll reread them. That is a great idea. I've never thought about that. I love it. I'm going to stop sharing the screen. Rehearsing helps me, being as prepared as I can be. Yes, I did rehearse before this presentation. Okay. And do we have any questions? Okay, I wanted to look at the Q&A too.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to bring up. Sorry, my camera, it doesn't like to run for this long, so
You're good.
I know because I've had it on all day, it overheats. But there was this question on here from Laura.
Okay.
Any advice on not letting imposter syndrome creep into your resume or cover letter have such a hard time promoting myself that I'm sure it comes through.
Yes. What I have done is I write my resume, and then I've had good relationships with my supervisors, and I've never been shy about the fact that I am leaving with my direct supervisors. I haven't had to be, so they have read it. But what I do recommend is finding a colleague that is a safe person, because I know when you're making an employment transition, it can be really difficult. Find somebody who works with you and let them read it and let them also give feedback, because one of the things I actually got this from Kayleen's presentation. I never thought about it. We like metrics, right? So I never put metrics in my resume, and I should, but I never thought about that. So I think when you work directly with people and they do know your skills very intimately, it helps to kind of have that kind of feedback. But that's a really good question.
I think there's an answer, maybe, or maybe this is
Oh,
in
yeah.
reference to
Check
it.
out the new cover letter templates in Work. I just found one that lists bullet points of why you're a good fit for the job and keep it simple. Cut out any negative thoughts from your draft. You don't want to give them a reason to reject you. 100%, Mary. And somebody had mentioned this earlier this week, where they have the question that's like, what, give me some of your weak points, or what are some things you can do to improve. There are ways to say that positively. Um, there are definitely ways to say that positively. So, if your weak point is I take on too many tasks, and I do take on too many tasks, um, I try to find ways to just say, I liked I like to problem solve, and sometimes, you know, I can get wrapped up in things. I'm not saying that good right now. I'm not good on the spot either, let me tell you that. So, but if I hope people are following what I'm saying, there are good ways to spin things that you find are a weak spot. Because sometimes when we talk about our weak spots, it's easy to just be like, I'm terrible at this, and I know I need to work on it, and I'm being very honest in this interview about that. Mary says, I also ask my oldest friends and colleagues what they like about me or how they would introduce you to someone new. I love it. Good.
Hey, for that first one from Mary, is that the templates in Word, or because it says work,
Ooh,
or is there a workplace that has templates? I just don't know it. In Mary's
that
first comment, check out the new cover letter templates in
for
Work.
work. Yeah, I don't know of a work. Mary, is that supposed to be Word?
Oh, okay, Word. It's supposed to be
Okay,
Word.
sweet.
Cool.
Awesome. One phrase I recommend taking out of someone's resume when I reviewed it recently was strive to. Like Yoda says, do or do not, there is no try. Yes. I love it. I love good Star Wars reference. Think about how your biggest supporters would describe you and then work on describing yourself that way. Awesome. All right. And yes, Mary, when you find that template name, if you can drop it in the chat and maybe we can get that in resources.
Yep. Oh, great.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and start wrapping it up here. I just want to mention tomorrow we open the day with Heidi Kirby, who is incredibly knowledgeable about this stuff. She spoke about transitioning at our earlier event this year. I think it was Matt that had referenced it, Matt Vosmick in the last session. But tomorrow she's starting with how to gain useful ID experience before you get the job. So that is going to be a really, really good one. Ricky Fisher and Stephanie Diggins are coming back for a couple of virtual tables, and Kayleen as well later in the afternoon. And then we have a second session from Joelle, transitioning or transitioned, navigating the in between. So tomorrow, great stuff. Hope to see you there. Sorry my camera isn't working, but it just like burns out by the time after so many hours. And yeah, that's it. Devin, wonderful. I knew this was going to be a great one. Really had an impact. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. Thank you to everybody who came through, and I hope I see some of you all tomorrow.
Yay. Okay, bye everybody.
See ya.